Well, let me go ahead and I'll do the screen share because I do have a immediately available. And if I could preface this land statement again, this is the third day that we, at invitation, the President's Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has started the professional development activities with the land statement, but land acknowledgement. But if I could preface a little bit more in kind of recognizing why we do this and to anchor it a little bit better in academic practice. Many institutions, public institutions, in particular institutions of higher education, in a demonstration of and a willingness to work with more authentic recognitions of the history of our institutions and the history of our nation, the history of our areas of knowledge, have been utilizing these land acknowledgement statements as a recognition. And so if you allow me, I want to read it both in the Spanish and in the English. Reconocemos que estas tierras antes pertenecían a los tribus Tanoan, incluso los pueblos Tiwa del norte, los Dene, los Apache, los Kiowa, los Comanche. Mostramos nuestros respetos a los ancianos del pasado y del presente. También reconocemos a aquellas personas desplazadas en nombre del progreso colonizador. Con humildad reconocemos y respetamos la población indígena, sus historias y sus conexiones a la tierra. We acknowledge that we are on the ancestral territories of the Tanoan tribes, including the 19 pueblos, the Apache, the Comanche, the Dene, the Kiowa, and the Ute. We pay our respect to elders both past and present, and we recognize these peoples were displaced to accommodate others in the names of progress. With humility, we recognize and respect all indigenous peoples, their histories, and their ties to the land. And if I could transition this land acknowledgement into a little bit of both an invitation and a challenge, in that we are sitting on ancestral lands, there's story and knowledge that preceded us with our institutional presence. And so becoming part of this place, being part of this institution, it behooves us that we recognize and we understand how important it is for those that came before us. And not only in a general recognition and a symbolic demonstration of respect, but rather to the degree that we could reiterate their narrative and that we could recognize the knowledge patterns that were set in place. And again, to some degree that has been displaced. This is part of a life work for me. My dissertation, my research in my dissertation is geared around the narrative, the story formation of place identity, how narrative is important. And so again, my challenge is to you, my colleagues, that you recognize these stories, these narratives, these areas of knowledge that had preceded us and are still present as vestige, as shared knowledge, as community knowledge. And perhaps even to the degree that within your practice, within your educational research pursuits and your instructional activity, that you also recognize those that have came before us as knowledge and story and as remembrance out of respect. So thank you and have a beautiful and wonderful day. I'm looking forward to the presentations today as well as everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. All right.
And again, I'm as my colleagues mentioned, we can make this particular version available to anybody who wishes to work with it.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Please reach out to Dr. Romero, or Adrian Sandoval, Dr. Moore. Thank you again. So moving right along, we do have a packed day today, but it should be a really fun day. Though we are going to start with Title IX reporting. This is a mandatory training for all faculty, staff, and administrators, and our wonderful Title IX, is it director?
Coordinator.
coordinator, um, coordinator will lead us in our training. So Ruth Mariam Kulski, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining me first thing in the morning to talk about federal regulations. No, really my goal for this training is to give faculty and staff and administrators some practical tools to know when, where, how, and why to report misconduct that's covered by Title IX. So if we will jump right in, with my beautiful splash slide. You're on. All right. It's so beautiful, but we're going to move on to slide number 2. Okay. So we're going to start with a brief discussion of what Title IX actually is. There's a lot of misconceptions about what Title IX refers to. What Title IX is a federal law that prohibits sex discrimination in educational programs and activities. And here you can see in bold the key quote that they usually pull out: no person shall on the basis of sex be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education or program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, which of course includes us and most public universities and most private universities. I just want to call out 2 key features of Title IX. It is specific to sex and gender. It does not mean any form of discrimination. It means discrimination on the basis of sex and gender. It does not cover any other form of discrimination. It also does not require anyone to be professional or civil or nice. And that is simply to understand that while we want all of our colleagues to be professional or civil or nice, being uncivil or unprofessional or unkind does not violate Title IX. So understanding what the boundaries are of what we're about to discuss, let's move on to slide 3, please. Slide 3. Oh, there we go. All right. So Title IX, in terms of a university, because Title IX applies to both K through 12 and universities, but in terms of a university, Title IX requires universities to take action to end unlawful discrimination on the basis of sex. In a very recent case this year, the Supreme Court found that discrimination against those who are transgender and those who do not conform to gender stereotypes is included in discrimination on the basis of sex. Now, technically speaking, that case was not under Title IX, but the federal court usually interprets anti-discrimination statutes consistently. So we can at least believe that Title IX also forbids discrimination against individuals who are transgender or individuals who, for whatever reason, do not match societal expectations of how genders perform. So one thing I just want to throw out there is some people make a strong association between Title IX and sports. Sports is just one area in which violations often occurred in the past. That's why there's a close association between Title IX and sports. However, every program of the university must offer equal access and equal education, regardless of gender. So sports, kind of just like an example. It's not the be all end all of Title IX. Next slide, please. So Title IX, you say discrimination on the basis of gender. There's 3 broad categories. There's disparate treatment, when individuals are treated differently on the basis of sex with regard to direct services like classwork, grades, campus services, housing, or the opportunities they have within the university. In other words, that is when services are not dispersed equitably. The next category is harassment on the basis of sex, which is verbal, nonverbal, physical aggression, intimidation, hostility directed towards an individual based on sex or based on the idea of sex stereotyping. And finally, we have sexual harassment, and it is slightly different from harassment on the basis of sex. It's a subcategory. Sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. Now, it's important to know that harassment To constitute an actual violation of the law, harassment must be severe and pervasive in order to violate Title IX. That's a very important standard. It's a high standard. That said, when it comes to student issues or the issues of your colleagues, are we going to wait until an issue is severe and pervasive? No, because by the time it gets to severe and pervasive, it's violating the law, man. We don't want to do that. So I want you to be educated to know that a legal violation only occurs when the harassment is severe and pervasive. But as a community, we're going to, welcome and encourage reports of conduct that may not meet that standard so that we can address it before it becomes severe and pervasive. So next slide, please. Okay, so Title IX has this somewhat, it's not commonsensical. It makes sense within the context of Title IX, but from an objective standpoint, it's a little bit of a weird concept. But Title IX sexual harassment includes sexual assault and all forms of exploitation, stalking, dating violence, and domestic violence, as long as it occurs on campus or in relation to campus activities. So most people think of sexual harassment as something bad, but a step down from the badness of being assaulted. But under Title IX, sexual harassment includes the definition of sexual assault. So that is, all right, next slide. All right, and the next slide is basically about who is Title IX protecting. The answer is on campus, everyone. As I wrote, a violation of Title IX is defined by a what, which is a type of conduct, and not a who, which is a type of person. And that is to say that Title IX protects students, staff, faculty, graduate assistants, RAs, hybrid student employees, every person who is an employee or a student on our campus, full-time, part-time, tenured, adjunct, every category is equally protected from Title IX. And some people are surprised to learn that Title IX actually applies and protects employees as well as students. They see it as a student-oriented law. But employees have just as much right to an environment free of sexual harassment as students do. And the other thing I want to highlight about how and where Title IX applies is that it doesn't discriminate on the basis of gender. It applies equally to men and to women. And it applies equally to those who are gender conforming and not gender conforming, and so on. It also doesn't discriminate based on a role within a university. A law applies to everyone. And the person's gender at birth, gender identity, sexuality, sexual identity, or any other identity related to sex or gender does not define sexual harassment. And what I mean by that is that a person, some people kind of imagine, well, I'm being harassed by a person who is gay and I'm not gay. Are they sexually harassing me? They know that they're not going to get a date with me. They know that I'm straight. People get all caught up in identities, but none of that actually matters to the definition of sexual harassment. Whether you share a sexuality with a person who is harassing you or whether you don't, whether you share a gender, women can harass women, men can harass men, men can harass women, and women can harass men. There is every variety under the sun, and never think that your identity means that you cannot harass someone. That is not true. This is just an understanding that we all are protected by Title IX as employees and those of us who are also students. In addition, we all can violate Title IX with our conduct if we do not keep our conduct in keeping with the law. So next slide, please. So the main thrust of that kind of covers the definitions. And if anyone has any questions about the overall definitions of how and when Title IX applies, you could throw out a few questions if you want to put them in the chat, and I'll try to take them in the next lull if there's no immediate questions. But the thrust of my presentation is really about how to report a matter that comes to your attention, whether it's something that happened to you, something that happened to a friend, or something that a student tells you, or something that you just witness. This is the definition of mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporting means that informing me, that's the Title IX coordinator, of a potential violation is not optional. And mandatory reporting means that if a student tells a mandatory reporter employee that they're the victim of conduct covered by Title IX, or the employee isn't sure but thinks there might be a violation, they are required to report that to me. It's important to understand that mandatory reporters are not required to evaluate the merits, the truthfulness, or the accuracy of what they've been told. And a mandatory reporter should never conduct any investigation into what they have been told. What they should do is pick up the phone, give me a call, send me an email, a text message, anything that works to get in contact with me, and let me know, hey, I was told this by a student. Now, when it comes to mandatory reporting, depending how long you've been teaching, you may be familiar with the old Obama era guidance that basically says that the definition of a mandatory reporter was a student's subjective belief that they were reporting to an official of the university. So that's the old rule. In 2020, we got new regulations. And the new rule is that, except for a few senior administrators, mandatory reporters must be designated in an official policy. So the student's perception of whether they're reporting to the university is no longer the controlling factor in whether a mandatory report must be made. And for those of you who are have been teaching for a while and we're familiar with that old rule, that is a change. And these are some examples on the next slide of people who are mandatory reporters by law. These would be senior administrators, also in the regulation called officials with authority, because they have the authority to impose a penalty. These are the main ones that are generally understood to be officials with authority. Then in the next category, in the next slide, next slide, please. There we go. Oh, this is officials with authority. I'm sorry, I got a little off track there. As you can see, this is a kind of a what I might call a common sense list. This is probably the list of what, if you just asked random people who are the officials with authority in our institution, they will probably come up with a list that looks something like this. So this is usually kind of common sense for most people. Then if we move to the next slide, we have a much longer list of mandatory reporters by policy. And just to be in total transparency and full disclosure, this is a proposed policy that has not yet been finalized by the regents, but we don't expect this particular section to change. But the star means that this policy is not yet in effect. Therefore, as faculty members, unless you have one of those roles of administrator with authority, you are not in this moment a mandatory reporter, but we would ask that you consider yourself a reporter and also understand that this is coming in the near future, hopefully, that these lists of people would be mandatory reporters under the policy. So this would include other executive administrators who weren't listed in that previous list, the student relations coordinator, the outdoor recreation coordinator, the registrar, financial aid officers, residence directors, residence assistants, student success coaches, athletic coaches, other athletic staff, which would include athletic trainers as well, academic deans, campus police officers, campus security officers, and any faculty member not otherwise already designated, as well as administrative assistants, that support these roles. You'll notice that these roles are all either highly student facing, there's a lot of contact, or there's supervision over employees. So those are kind of two of the factors that were considered and who should be mandatory reporters under our proposed policy. Next slide, please. This is pretty much the question that everybody basically wants to know. This is like the pinnacle, the apex, if you will, of this presentation. They're like, okay, I'm supposed to report. What happens then? Because that's usually what people want to know in order to make a decision. It's really very simple. When you report something to me, the first thing that I do is contact the student or employee who is affected by the conduct that you're reporting and explain that they have options within the process, and I will find out from them what they want to do. In most cases, this is like a complainant-led process. If the person affected doesn't want to talk to me, they don't have to. If the person wants to talk to me, they aren't required to file a formal complaint to begin an investigation. They can just what I call make a report, voice their concerns. There are a few narrow circumstances where something will come to my desk. The person affected will not want to participate. I have the ability to initiate a formal complaint on my own authority. That means initiate an investigation. Even if that happens, the affected person is still not required to participate. So as you can see, it's a lot comes down to what the individual chooses to do, what the conduct was, and they usually have a variety of options on how they want to proceed. The important thing for you to know as faculty who are kind of trying to get straight in their head how to respond to this type of complaint, regardless of what the individual chooses, any person who makes a report or speaks to me about concerns can receive supportive services such as mental health counseling, accompaniment to legal proceedings or meetings with the police, and confidential help in making a decision about what to do next from a person who is not me, from a person who is actually trained and a licensed counselor. So understand one of the big things that I would really like to encourage and see encouraged is encourage people to understand that speaking to me is just a first step. It triggers services, it triggers my ability to provide services. And those services can be provided even if no formal investigation takes place. So for example, you can't penalize, you can't engage in any punitive conduct without a formal investigation under Title IX, which is to say you can't punish someone, but supportive services are not a punishment. So providing supportive services, and that is something that for many people, they want a resolution. My goal is to provide a resolution that is empowering in the sense that it's the resolution that the person was able to choose from among their options, right? Unfortunately, I cannot provide every option under the sun. One thing I will say, and I'll say it very explicitly, is absolutely no one will be terminated or fired without going through the formal process that Title IX requires. So understand that if you're making a complaint and you don't want to go through the formal process, that limits the resolutions that can be applied. That is just the balancing act of the Title IX regulations. And they require that no punitive action take place without an investigation. However, supportive action can take place without an investigation. So those are two very different things under the regs. All right, we have a hypothetical on the next slide. All right, I'm going to read it to you. You guys can just read along with me. Dr. Joseph Alvarez is a new professor of geology who teaches 2 undergraduate sections of Introduction to Geology. Dr. Alvarez tries to be friendly in general, but he doesn't actively interact with students outside of class, except at geology department activities. So Dr. Alvarez is very surprised when a freshman student visits him during office hours and says they need advice on something that's not class related. The student, George, tells Dr. Alvarez that he thinks he was drugged and sexually assaulted 2 weeks ago while out with friends. George begins to cry, saying his parents don't know that he's gay and he doesn't know what to do. George's story is a bit disjointed, and Dr. Alvarez is not even sure if the assault George is describing occurred on campus. Dr. Alvarez hardly knows George and feels extremely uncomfortable and out of his element. Dr. Alvarez just wanted to share his love of rocks. He does not know how to advise George on these very personal matters. So there's some questions that I kind of want you to think about. The first question is, does it matter if the assault occurred off campus? From the perspective of supporting the student, no. From the perspective of Title IX, yes. Title IX only applies in on-campus or places where the university exercises substantial control. So that can include off-campus facilities that are operated by the university or a university endorsed organization. But they don't apply outside the United States. They don't, such as in exchange programs. They do not apply off campus in a place where the university doesn't exercise control, such as a private apartment off campus. They certainly don't apply in an off campus environment like a club, except if somehow the university was involved in actively providing that facility. So it does actually matter to Title IX that the assault occurred off campus, but on the flip side, it doesn't matter to George at all. He's very upset. He's not thinking, oh, where is my geographical jurisdiction? He's just thinking that he's upset. So understand that the fact that it occurred on or off campus can be legally significant, but in dealing with the person who's making this report to you, it doesn't really enter into the equation. Question number 2 is whether Dr. Alvarez should ask George for more details, because George's story, as is mentioned in the hypothetical, quite disjointed, and Dr. Alvarez is having a hard time making sense of what he's actually describing. That isn't unusual for people who have had traumatic experiences, that their stories are disjointed or nonlinear or lack narrative. But really, at the end of the day, Dr. Alvarez should just take George's report at face value and not probe for more details, because it's not really proper for Dr. Alvarez to essentially begin an investigation without even giving George, information about his options and the legal requirements and what his choices are. That's my role. So what Dr. Alvarez should really do is report the situation to me, and I will reach out to George and find out what he wants to do. The next question is there any place where George can get free and confidential help? Confidential help means a person who is not required to report what they know. The answer is yes. The Student Health Center licensed mental health counselors can advise George completely free, and what he might tell them is held confidential, including from me, unless George gives his explicit permission to share the information. So there is a place for George to get confidential assistance. This is probably high on George's, number 4 is probably a question that's very high on George's mind when he's talking to Dr. Alvarez. Will George's parents be informed of the assault if Dr. Alvarez reports it to the Title IX coordinator? So FERPA basically says, no, unless George agrees and consents and is given information about what the informational privacy rights he has. So, but certainly George's parents will not be automatically informed. That is considered a matter that is private to the student. Next, George tells Dr. Alvarez that he's going to make a report to the Title IX coordinator himself. Should Dr. Alvarez still make his own report? The answer is, what if the student is 17? If the student is a minor, there can be special rules that apply. If you have received a report from a student who is a minor, honestly, just give me a call, because picking your way through what needs to be done with a minor student can be complicated, and really it's my job to support you. Your job is to let me know what you know. Oh, I was saying, should Dr. Alvarez make an independent report if George says he's going to make a report? And the answer is yes. Dr. Alvarez should still make a report to the Title IX coordinator, because well, George may say that he's making a report, and he may make a report, and he may not make a report. He's certainly not required to make a report. If he changes his mind, that's his right. However, as an institution, we would like to know what is going on with our students, and that's why we are developing a mandatory reporting regime for faculty. So really, Dr. Alvarez should make his own report as an independent act within his job and his role as a faculty member. I would say that regardless of, if you hear something, again, student, colleague, friend, staff member, janitor, it doesn't matter who the person is within the institution. If you hear of someone being either sexually assaulted, sexually harassed, stalked, make your own report. You're doing what you should do. What the individual does is kind of up to them, and I try to keep it that way. But as reporting faculty, you are in a position where I'm going to ask that you make your own independent report, even if you think the student has come forward already or will come forward in the future. So that is the story of Dr. Alvarez and George. And one thing I really want to highlight is handling these type of situations can be really, really stressful, not only for the individuals affected, but you as faculty or a person who hears about this type of report can also cause you a lot of stress and uncertainty and not being sure what to do. And I'm trying to simplify it down here. If you hear something that sounds like this, just let me know about it. That is how we're going to move forward, and you will know that you've done what needs to be done. One thing I will say is that the students' conversations with me are private. They aren't confidential. What that means is that I share information only on a need-to-know basis to pursue an investigation. And what that means is that you, as a reporter, will probably not receive any update information about what's happening after you make a report, because unless you are need to know, like unless you're a fact witness, unless you actually witness the conduct, you will not be receiving that type of information, because the goal for the person who's affected is to forward the investigation, but still keep the matter as private as is possible. So those are some of the issues that I hope this example raised, and also understand that if you feel stressed out and confused, if you kind of can't figure out why the student chose you to tell this fact to, that's all very normal reactions. I will say that generally speaking, if a student discloses something of this nature to you, it's somewhat of a compliment. They believe that you are trustworthy and can give good advice. So as stressful as it may be to hear this type of report for you, know that the student who is taking you into their confidence, and that's because they believe that you're a good advisor. So although none of us want to be in the situation of receiving one of these reports, it is a compliment in a strange way to your rapport with your students. So let's go to the next slide, which is called the next slide. Yeah. Which is called What Should Dr. Alvarez Do? Okay. My three-pronged attack on what Dr. Alvarez should do is, number one, and the absolute number one, advise the students of their rights. Let them know that they have a right to make a report to the Title IX coordinator. And in addition, if you believe that what they're describing could be a crime, you can also let them know that they have the right to make a report to the campus police as well. But really advising the student of what their rights are, super important. Second, inform the student about counseling services. Student Health Center can offer support and guidance, and they are completely confidential. They can take the confidential reports, which means they have no obligation to share it unless there is an immediate safety hazard, which is a very rare situation. Student Health Center, the number's here, 505-454-3218. There's also a 24-hour state crisis line, NM Crisis, which is available for anyone who just like needs absolute immediate support. They're 24/7, 365. And that is something that they can utilize immediately if they need to. Finally, lastly but not leastly, report it to me. And as I said, I will follow up with the student directly. In addition to discussing with the student how they want to proceed, I can also provide information, answer questions, and direct them to services. So I don't know, I'm sure there's a wide variety of perspectives because Title IX regulations changed last year, and the changes were very substantial. The changes are hotly debated. The changes are disputed in federal court in some degree. And it can be a really complicated, there can be a lot of complicated questions. The regulation is quite technical in some areas. I wouldn't expect you faculty to be able to give the nitty-gritty details of all the different elements. That's not really your area. It's my area. And that's why I'm here to serve you faculty, to also serve staff, to serve administration, and to serve students. But this is like the number 1, 2, 3, advise, inform, report, right? If you can just take one thing away from this, whole training, it would be this side. Advise the student of their rights, inform the student about counseling, report the situation to me. This is it right here. This is all right here. And that is pretty much winding down the elements of reporting that I really wanted to talk about today. I know I may have spoken very quickly. I know you have a lot of training ahead of you today. Should be a really interesting day. My final thoughts for Title IX are Title IX protects students and employees from discrimination on the basis of sex in their university education and university programs. Title IX covers a lot of different kinds of negative conduct that can occur on campus because of a person's sex, from unequal educational or extracurricular opportunities to sexual assault and domestic violence. Faculty and some staff employees will be designated as mandatory reporters under a proposed New Mexico Highlands policy. And when you make a report to me, it is only the first step and doesn't result in any specific action except me reaching out to the student and finding out how they want to proceed. This is the next slide. I'm sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. Lots of people are concerned that as they make a report, there will be an immediate and negative cascade of actions that are out of the students' or employees' control. That is not really how I operate. It's not really how Title IX is supposed to operate either. And just understand that, yes, you're not going to be triggering a catastrophic avalanche of problems for the student. All I'm going to do is say, hey, I heard that, I heard this report that you're affected by this conduct. I heard that you're being stalked. I wanted to know whether you want to make a formal complaint, and if not, if there's anything that I can do to help you feel safe on campus. That's kind of the conversation that we're going to have. And I would also add that something to know is one of my powers. Hang on, I see a question in chat, but I'm just going to say this one comment before I go to that. One of my powers as Title IX coordinators is to issue no contact orders on my own authority, which I always call a stay away order. It's like, stay away, just stay away. Right? So that is a lot easier to obtain than going through the legal system, and the standard for a restraining order is different from the standard of a campus stay away. But of course, my stay away order only applies on campus. It only applies to campus events. So I know there was a question in chat. I saw it pop up. Hang on, I'm gonna go look. She said, do the same rules apply if you're told of a Title IX violation by a colleague? I think you're asking if you're told of a Title IX violation affecting a colleague, like a colleague was affected by a Title IX violation or conduct that could be a violation. Yes, they are. There's really no difference. The only difference is that because of a different context, different types of supportive measures may be more appropriate and less appropriate for faculty as opposed to students. But things like counseling, things like, you know, changing or moving schedules or moving offices, these things are possibilities also for students. Oh, someone asked how to reach me. It's the final slide. If Veronica, can you advance to the final slide? It has my contact information. Because I have a very, very long last name, my email address is ruthm@nmhu.edu. You can also use tix@nmhu.edu. That is a universal email address that directs to the Title IX coordinator only. But should the Title IX coordinator change in the future, you would still be able to use tix@nmhu to reach the Title IX coordinator. That is within my role as Title IX coordinator. I have another role, which is Director of Compliance. And within that role, I investigate matters under Title VII, which is the anti-discrimination law, covering like all kinds of race, ethnicity, all the protected categories in state and federal law. The reason why I've chosen to focus on the Title IX aspect today is that it's a confusing area, an area where the rules have changed. So hazing is a really interesting question. If it's not on the basis of gender, it doesn't fall under Title IX. If it's within the context of athletics, it may fall under NCAA regulations. Generally speaking, violence and harm to other students, it violates the student code of conduct. We do have an anti-hazing policy. And that's the thing that I want to kind of understand. Title IX is like a carve out. It's not the only conduct on campus that's wrong, or the only conduct on campus that investigable. Something like hazing, if it came to me, depending on the nature of what the person described, I would likely refer it to the dean of students if it involves students, because this is described as a student organization. If somehow employees were involved in the hazing situation, that would be something that I would consult with HR. But that is basically, someone else asked, what if it's secondhand information? Looks like that's Scott Parkman. Hi, Scott. I think you mean you hear something and it's not from the person affected. Like you hear like that Joe's little sister is being domestically assaulted within her relationship and lives in a dorm. I think that's what you're saying. It's like not the person affected that's telling you, but some other person. I think that when mandatory reporting actually becomes policy, if you think it violates Title IX, if you think it covers that conduct, then you would be required to report it, again, without evaluating the merits of what you heard, right? Once, for the time being, given that mandatory reporting is not yet formal policy, there's a judgment call there. This is one of the reasons why mandatory reporting is actually much simpler for faculty. Again, bullying would fall under codes of conduct unless it's on the basis of gender. On the Title IX is only on the basis of gender. Bullying, depending on what's going on, could fall under student code of conduct. And if it's employees, it could fall under employee codes of conduct. Again, depending on the very exact nature of what's being described. In my role, a lot of times people come to me because they're not 100% sure if something, fits into one of these categories. So if somebody comes to me with a concern and it doesn't fit into one of my categories, whether that is Title IX, race and gender, whether that's Title VII, discrimination, whether that's Fair Labor Standards Act, wage and hours, they can kind of just tell me what happened, and I will try to direct it to the appropriate forum if I'm not the appropriate forum. I'll never just let a person be like, oh, sorry, not my job, not my deal. I'll try to make sure that how a person with a concern knows how to pursue whatever resolution is available to them. And that is pretty much. Did I get all the questions? I'm sorry, I'm just going through the chat right now, just making sure that I hit everybody's questions.
I think so. I think the only question that that came up before you started going through them was one in regards to what resources, student health center, etc., are available for students at other sites like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Farmington, so on.
Yes, I believe my understanding is that Student Health Center can do virtual visits for people who are remotely located, and indeed during the pandemic, a lot of their visits were virtual visits. So that is a resource available to students. It's not specific to the Las Vegas campus, and the NM Crisis Hotline is also statewide and available to everybody free of charge. So I would encourage students, if they need some mental health support, I would encourage them to reach out to the Student Health Center for an appointment that they can do remotely, or I suppose if they're sometimes in Las Vegas, then they can arrange it in a convenient manner. But they do telehealth, at least to some degree. So that is my presentation. I hope that I have given you some guidance in how to handle a situation that can be very stressful, upsetting. And please consider me as a resource. If you have questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking in the chat, please just feel free to contact me. That's right. Thank you very much, Laura. That's exactly correct. Yeah, I guess, once again, advise the person of their rights, advise them, let them know that they have access to counseling, and let me know what happens so I can reach out to them and they can decide what to do. So thank you very much, everybody. And for some people who may be interested, I have an additional program at 2 o'clock that is more directly about sexual harassment and make a little bit more directly also about employment law. So thank you. And I do appreciate all the questions and the engagement. I know there's a real need for knowledge in this area. So hopefully I'll continue to provide you with the knowledge and in a way that's useful to you. So take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you for your time. And like she said, the sexual harassment awareness training does happen this afternoon at 2. Thank you, Ruth. And thank you, everyone, for participating, and good questions.
Very great questions.
Yeah. We will take a 10-minute break and be back. Same link, same Zoom link at 9 for our, let's see, what is it? Our outcome assessment updates and workshop. So see you back here in 10 minutes. Have a good one.